I've been working with surface industry businesses of all sizes, and I've noticed something. No matter how different the company, almost every single one eventually runs into the same roadblocks. And I call these the 3 stages of stuck. In this mini series, I'm going to be breaking down each one so that you can recognize the symptoms, avoid the mistakes, and make the shifts that'll actually help you move your business forward and out of these stuck stages. Or ideally, you can avoid them altogether. Now, here's what we're going to cover. The first stage of stuck, I called the survival stage spiral. Now, this is where your business is trapped in that feast or famine cycle, and cash flow is always on edge. It's inconsistent and you don't have the confidence to really take your business to the next level. The second stage is called the owner overload loop. Now, this is where far too much in the business depends on you, and you can't really step away. Your business is lacking true systems, and really what's holding the business together is that you are the system, and that's just not scalable, right? And then stage number 3 is called the growth gridlock ceiling. Now, this is where you've built real momentum in your business. It's gotten to a pretty solid level, but at this stage, complexity and bottlenecks are stopping you from scaling further. You've been unable to really break through that. The business has plateaued, but not only that, quality is starting to suffer. There's more stress overall because there's just so much more volume at this size of business. So today we're going to start off with stage 1, the first stage of stuck. This is where 1 month you're buried in work, and then the next month it's tumbleweeds blowing through your pipeline. Maybe you're in the situation where you look at your install schedule and you think, in 3 weeks, the world's going to end, right? Because you really don't have consistency and predictability, right? If you're the type of surface business where you don't have an install crew, then it's where you're really looking at the unpredictability of your sales pipeline, right? Sometimes it's flush and other times not so much, right? Sometimes there's weeks where you've got a lot of cash in the bank, other weeks where you're sweating payroll, or you're waiting for those big checks to come in. I know that some of you guys that work with builders, contractors, etc., are frustrated that you're basically being treated like the bank, right? For a lot of these jobs. Now, if any of these symptoms sound familiar, it's because you're stuck in that survival stage spiral. And today I'm going to break down the 10 biggest mistakes that are keeping your surface business trapped in this vicious cycle. And I'm going to share also the story of a $3 million surface business that, while they had tripled in revenue in just a 3-year stretch, they still couldn't escape this trap until they made some critical changes and shifts in their business to get free from it once and for all. All right, guys. So let's first off, before I dig into those top 10 mistakes, the things that if you want to stay stuck in this stage, you'll keep doing, right? First, I want to back it up and talk about what this trap often feels like, right? What does the feast and famine cycle feel like or look like? For a lot of you guys, it might be that, there's periods of time where you're landing, a high volume of jobs or a couple of big jobs, and that keeps you slammed for weeks. And you're just struggling to keep up. But while you're busy trying to make good on all the promises you made to land those jobs, you're not marketing and you're not selling. And then when those jobs wrap up, suddenly cash flow dries up. And that's such a vicious cycle to be trapped in, because often when you've got that increased volume, you're having to get other team members. You have to get an extra crew, all sorts of things to be able to keep up with that demand. Maybe you as the business owner gets pulled back into some of those jobs, right? Only then to get on the other side of that when cash flow is dried up and it's crickets, that now you've got too many people that are sitting around, for example. So that's some of the way that it shows up for some of you guys. For others, the feast and famine cycle, if you, aren't doing fabrication, you're not doing installing, for example, and you just have a material supply business, what that looks like for you is that your business, you feel, is at the whims of seasonality, right? Or at the whims of when designers send you, jobs, or a builder. And outside of that, you really don't have much control. So it's, yeah, okay, a little busier after summer, for example. For some of you guys, that might look like summer's a little quieter. And then after, when everybody goes back to school, it's slammed, right? So you're busier then. You really got to ramp things up at that time. And then after that, as you head into the fall months and holidays, it's going to slow down again, right? That's just very common. And a lot of people accept that, but that's not the way it has to be. You can't grow your business when you're at the whims of the market, seasonality, or your customers. All right. The other way that this trap shows up and what it looks like and feels like is the revenue roller coaster, right? That's really the feeling that you have, right? Some months look great. And then other months you're scrambling, to pay vendors, to make payroll. And it's really stressful, right? To be on that constant revenue roller coaster. That's an emotional and anxiety filled ride to be on. And so this is what we really want to get you out of. All right. And the other thing I want to really drive home, and here's the kicker, is that the spiral doesn't just happen for smaller companies, right? So we've seen this at companies that are $5 million plus, where they're still stuck in the survival stage spiral, just at a bigger scale. And when it's at that scale, it's quite a painful place to be. So ideally, if you're in the earlier stages and you're listening or watching this, you can see this, you can either avoid this altogether, or you're going to be able to do the right things so that you can get out of this once and for all. All right. So who usually finds themselves stuck at this stage? Well, some of the common scenarios are when the owner is the rainmaker, right? Everything depends on them to bring in sales, whether that's their ability to close jobs, their relationships with designers or builders. It's them that does, the marketing. It's them that'll pick up the phone when it's necessary to get a couple of extra jobs, right? That's not what's going to allow you to really scale your business. And that's one of the traps that you're going to find yourself stuck in if that's what you're relying on. The other thing is when businesses are too dependent on word of mouth and referrals, which means they really have an unpredictable pipeline, right? They're at the whims of others to keep their business humming along. And then the other scenario that I see, unfortunately, more often than I would like, is companies have grown really fast. Overhead has grown with it, but they aren't really in the driver's seat to be able to control the number of leads they get, the number of sales that they can produce. And as a result of having grown really quickly and needing to expand different areas of their business to keep up with that, when things start to slow down, they still have the same level of overhead, but they're not able to produce enough cash to keep the business in a healthy position. If, for example, we look back to something that happened recently to a lot of companies, is COVID for many was a boom, right? Never before had companies seen so many home improvement projects, right? So many kitchen and bath projects. So there was just so much more moving through for them. And then things started to slow down, right? So they had decided to increase staff, more equipment, more crews, more trucks, increase lines of inventory, right? Expand, expand, expand. And then things started to slow down. Then they realized, I'm not in control, actually, of being able to drive this level of business. And as a result, now they're upside down, right? So that's a Recent example that so many people went through, and hopefully we don't have to go through something like that again for you to recognize, wait, I can't be at the whims of the market and I have to get in the driver's seat of my business. All right, so let's talk about now, before I get into the top 10 mistakes, why you stay stuck. Why do so many stone, tile, flooring companies and get trapped in the survival stage spiral, right? Why is it so hard to get out of? Well, first, it very often can feel like, and often is really, a chicken and the egg problem, right? When money's tight, it feels impossible to invest in the solutions that are going to get you out of this trap, out of this, where your back's in a corner. Instead, what happens though is that owners put their limited resources that they do have into the wrong places, right? Sometimes they think, okay, well, we need more sales. I'm going to hire another salesperson. Well, now they have a fixed, line item in their payroll, for example, when they don't actually have control of getting more leads. That's going to keep that salesperson busy. And, hard truth here is that most salespeople that you're going to hire aren't going to pay for themselves. They're not going to pay for themselves and above that produce a profit for you by really being able to ramp up sales. Or they start to invest. It's crazy, but I see this all the time. They invest in things that they think are growth activities. I'm going to upgrade equipment. I'm going to go buy more inventory, to improve what we have to attract more customers. No, that's not going to work, right? And if it does, it's going to be real short term. They haven't solved the core issue, which is the ability to acquire customers predictably and consistently. And without that, you're never going to be able to really break free of that feast and famine cycles. Second thing, keeping people stuck, is mindset. A lot of owners resign themselves to the fact that it's just slow sometimes. There are slow seasons, and that's just the way it is. Sometimes we're busy, sometimes we're slow. Or they carry the limiting belief that marketing doesn't work for my business, doesn't work in my market. There's not good leads on those channels, or I tried it once and it didn't work for me. I'm not going to do it again. Instead of getting educated on what does work, right? So we've got to make that mindset shift. We can't resign ourselves to the fact that it's just slow sometimes. We need to be able to generate demand so that it's never slow. And that's way, way easier said than done, but that's the game that we have to play. We have to educate ourselves to figure out what will work in our market. How can we make sure that we're able to get things to be nice and consistent and become a student of that game? All right. The really, really challenging part is the combination of those two things together, right? The limiting beliefs and that mindset and the unwillingness to invest or investing in the wrong things. When we have misplaced investments and blind spots, this is exactly what keeps us trapped, not only in the same place, but that's why I call it the survival stage spiral, because eventually it gets worse and worse. So the truth here, guys, is the only way out is through, and the way through is to build a system that generates demand on command, where you control, when I put this much in, I'm going to get this much out. And until that happens, the cycle is just going to keep repeating itself. All right. Now, I'm about to jump into the top 10 things that if you keep doing them, you're going to stay stuck in the survival stage spiral. But one last note, I want you to subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube or to the podcast, because in future episodes, I'm going to get really tactical. I'm going to get really tactical on how to build a marketing machine where you can generate demand predictably and with control. And so I don't want you to miss any of that. So if you subscribe, you're going to get notifications or automatically see those episodes so that you can really take control of your business. But starting here today with the 10 mistakes you're going to want to avoid is really important, because you're going to be able to see some wins without even having to get deep into things that are technical or that take time to produce a significant result, right? Just avoiding these 10 things is going to help you so much. All right. So, number one, and we already talked about it, but I'm just going to drive it home. Blaming seasonality instead of owning your pipeline. You, as a business owner, or if you're watching this and you're a manager or operator and you're treating the business like your own, that's important. You need to make that shift from thinking that we can't help it. Sometimes it's just slow. You need to instead own your pipeline. And when you shift your mindset, you need to start asking yourself the questions like, well, what do I have to do to make sure I've got enough volume of opportunities in the pipeline every month? What does that look like? Okay, that's number one. Take control. Number two, waiting for referrals instead of generating demand, right? We touched on that just a little bit, but I want to unpack that. We need to shift from relying on word of mouth and referrals to looking at what is one channel that I'm going to become a student of the game in so that I know how to pull the levers when I want to create more demand. What does that mean, more demand? Well, I'm first going to get more attention. I'm then going to be able to capture and convert that attention. And I'm going to be able to produce more leads and more sales through that channel. All right, that's the shift I want you to make, is that we're going to look at referrals and word of mouth as icing on the cake, something that we can't depend on. It's great. It's gotten our business to where we are today. But to get out of the survival stage spiral and to take our business to the next level, we got to be able to generate demand. Okay. Mistake number three, hiring salespeople, which is putting the cart before the horse when we don't have control over the volume of leads that we're going to be able to feed them. Okay. So I want you to make sure if you're thinking, hey, we got to increase sales, you are not hiring a salesperson until you can justify the volume for their position. All right. The only exception to that rule would be is if you're going to bring in a commission-only sales rep that's responsible for, example, building and landing more design build accounts, right? If you've got somebody that's going to do that work, okay, bring them in. But otherwise, no. You've got to make sure that you've got a nice, healthy pipeline before you do that. All right, the next one is investing in things that are out of sequence, right? Out of sequence. What do I mean by that? Well, right now in your stage of stuck, the survival stage spiral, the things that you should not be doing that are really for later stages of your business is buying new equipment, new lines of inventory, other forms of expansion before buying attention, right? Let me just drive that home again. If you're buying new things for the business that does not directly produce cash, what you should be focusing on investing instead is buying attention. That's the first thing your business needs more of that you should invest in before anything else. Now, the next one isn't as common, but I've seen it enough times that I feel like I gotta mention it here. And this is expanding locations. Yes, right? You're like, how does that work? You're in the survival stage spiral, but you're going to open a new location? Yeah, I've seen it. Or you're going to add on to your current location, and open a showroom if you didn't have one before, for example. Or you're going to expand your showroom, right? Without stabilizing demand. What do I mean by that? Well, if you have one location right now and you're thinking of opening a second location because that's somehow going to help your bottom line, but you haven't been able to prove that you can stabilize, well, first create demand and stabilize demand in your existing primary location, then you should not double down. That's one of the worst possible moves to make. And also you shouldn't expand, right? Because you don't have the ability to ensure that you're going to be able to generate enough attention, enough demand to ensure that you can meet the capacity or the need to sell everything you've put in a new or expanded showroom, for example. All right. So that can count for so many different things. And it kind of, the last, point and the thing to avoid are similar, right? Whether that's hiring new people, whether that's investing in new equipment, whether that's expanding, all of that's a full hard stop until you have control over your ability to produce cash in your business. And then you can make those investments. All right, this next one is often overlooked if you're thinking about, okay, what are some of the mistakes that I'm making or the things that I should stop doing that are sabotaging my ability to grow, to get out of the survival stage spiral, to get out of those feast or famine cycles. This one's kind of a two-parter. One is discounting to win jobs, competing on price. It may seem like a good idea to cut your margins a little bit in order to grab some more jobs because it's slow and you've got to fill your calendar, but it just feeds into the problem, right? Of, then you're going to be busy, but you're barely making any money on these projects. Usually those customers that are squeezing you on price or want a discount, or it's the jobs that, are really small and you shouldn't be taking them on really. And those are the ones that require the most hand holding or headaches, that really what it becomes is a time and energy suck. And while we feel like, hey, we're busy and that's good, it's going to keep you from really focusing on the things that are going to allow you to build a machine to fill your pipeline with the right jobs. And so we don't want to discount to win jobs. We want to fix positioning instead. We want to really work on our positioning of how we show up in the market to the right customers that are willing to pay top dollar to work with us. I said it was a two-parter. That's the main thing. The main mistake I want you to take away from this is to not discount to win jobs. But another little part of that is to feel okay with saying no to the jobs that you know are going to be not worth it, right? So if you're in the stone industry, if you're a stone shop, for you, that might be those jobs that are the remnant projects that a lady that has been in for the fifth time, it's taken like 4 hours of your time and tons of different emails or text messages back and forth for something that's going to be like $700. It's okay to no longer take on those types of jobs. And then, if you're a tile, flooring, et cetera, the types of jobs that are just red flag customers that you shouldn't be taking anymore because you're barely making any money on it. You're busting your ass for pennies, right? And so that's just kind of a bigger thing to kind of chew on there of things to avoid, that while they keep us busy and it feels like, okay, it's good, we're getting these jobs, it's a growth killer. All right, so I'll stop with that one. Let's get into the next one. The next one is the belief that marketing doesn't work here or doesn't work for me or isn't going to work for me. All of that I need you to take and I need you to burn it. Those beliefs are not going to serve you. Thinking that somehow somebody else's business is different, so it works for them, they're in a different market. No, marketing will work for everybody. It's a matter of learning what does for your business. And what I should say is, more often than not, it's the same thing that's working for everybody else, right? Far too often. And if this hurts some feelings, I don't mean for it to, but companies think that they are unique snowflakes. Like, oh, my business is different. That's not going to work for me. Marketing is universal, right? Sure. The channels might be different between a business. The creative or offers might be different between certain businesses, right? Sure. All of that is true, but marketing is universal and it will work for every business. It'll work for you, but you've got to put in the time, have the discipline, stay consistent with it, not expect a silver bullet that's going to save your business overnight. And you need to start. When's the best time to start? Yesterday. All right. Now, we are not a marketing company. I have no marketing services to sell you, but know that this is something that you're going to hear a lot of on this channel. What we do is we provide members of our program everything that we've provided since 2017 to surface industry pros that works. So you're going to get that as a bonus when you're coming into any of our programs to work on systemizing your business, to being able to figure out the right team members to hire, all the different things that we solve for inside of our Growth Engine program. You're also going to gain access to our marketing machine. And so our clients gain access to our marketing machine system that has helped our clients since 2017 to be able to 2x and 3x their business inside of 18 to 24 months. So I'm not out here saying, oh, you should do SEO or Google ads or this or that because we sell those services. I'm saying this to you because I want you to be able to build a healthy, sustainable business that gives you the freedom that you deserve. And the critical things to do that are building a marketing machine for your business. All right. So I hope I hammered that one home enough because it's important, shifting that mindset. And now I want to get into the last three. All right. Last three. Next up is failing to track numbers. Flying blind on your sales and your cash flow is a growth killer. Everything from how many leads is our business currently getting? What's the average deal size for each of those leads that we get when we close them? What's our conversion rate? What's our gap versus, from where we are now from a sales perspective to what our target is in order to have a healthy profit, right? And how much is it going to cost us to acquire a customer so that we know if we've got to close that gap? Well, we've got to close an extra 27 deals a month at 4.5K a deal in order to close that gap. And then cash flow, right? You've got to know your numbers. You've got to know all of the numbers inside of your business to know, are all projects created equal? Which ones are profitable? Which ones are we actually, coming up upside down on, right? You've got to know your numbers. You've got to track your numbers in order to get out of the survival stage spiral. All right. And then the last two, guys, I'm going to bring this home. This one might not hit home as some of the others, but mistaking busyness for being productive and making progress. Far too often as business owners, we're working on the wrong things that aren't really going to produce cash flow that we need to have a healthy business and get out of the survival stage spiral. So I want you to think about and audit, what am I spending my time on? Are these things directly related to bringing in more leads or creating more customers and producing more cash? The answer is no. Then you really got to think about, is this a priority and is this what I or my team should be spending our time on right now? All right. And then the last one is treating growth like luck instead of looking at it like building a repeatable system, right? And what do I mean by that? Treating it like luck. Well, you've probably heard me, if you've listened to the show or watched these episodes before, me saying that hope is not a strategy. Somewhat similar, but it's a big shift when we go from looking at, oh man, we had a cash flow crunch there. Thank God that job came in right when it did. A designer called me, they had a project, saved the day. Oh man, that, we made it. Like, that's great. I can breathe again. And while all that's great, right, that happened for you, you can't just go into the next month with the same behavior. We've got to look at, well, shit, like we weren't busy and I don't know if we're going to be busy next month. I've got to look at building a repeatable system that produces leads, customers, and cash, right? That's what you have to think about. I've got to spend my time as a business owner looking at building the systems that are going to produce those three things at scale. All right, guys. So those are the top 10 mistakes I want you to avoid to kick things off, to get you out of the survival stage spiral. And now I want to give you a real example. I worked with a $3 million surface business that had actually tripled over the last 3 years. And from the outside, it looked like they were winning, right? People and in their market, other companies were like, you guys are crushing it. Behind the scenes, they were still trapped in the survival stage spiral. Some months they were buried in work. Other months it was, just tumbleweed blowing through the pipeline. Cash flow was tight. Sometimes they were having to think about, which vendors am I going to pay and which ones I'm going to have to make wait. They were, having to rely on luck, like I was talking to you guys about, for that big check to come in on the 10th when it was supposed to save the day, right? And because they had grown so fast, they had actually done a lot of things out of sequence, which added to overhead and really caused them to be upside down. And their business was in a very vulnerable, dangerous spot. Now, while we couldn't change the fact that they were upside down and that they had done things out of sequence, what we could do was stop the bleeding, right? Step one was shifting their focus to closing that gap, the gap from being in the red to being healthily in the black, and putting all of our attention on that. So we concentrated on creating a very healthy pipeline, right? Figuring out how could we convert more of the opportunities that they already were getting to increase the average deal size of every single opportunity that they had, and then doing things that would get them quick wins, things that were low cost. In their case, we were able to help them install a system of outbound to builders, designers, architects, and contractors. Through that, in just 60 days, they were able to generate 7 figures in opportunities. Now, they didn't close all 7 figures, but that made a massive difference in putting them in the driver's seat of their business, and they were able to stabilize. Once they stabilized, they then made the shift of being relying on referrals and word of mouth to reinvesting, now that they had additional cash flow, into just one paid channel to create a predictable system where they knew their cost of customer acquisition. So they knew how many leads they were going to get per month. They knew what their conversion rate was going to be because they knew their numbers, and they knew how much it cost to get each one of those customers. When they did that, they then knew what it was going to cost to consistently fill their pipeline so that they could make sure they never ended up in that place again, and so that they could finally gain control of their cash flow. The result for them was that they were able to go from chasing growth that was breaking them down every month to creating a healthy profit month after month and scaling from a position of strength. All right, guys, so I'm going to bring this home. We covered the 10 mistakes I want you to avoid so that you can go from being stuck in the survival stage spiral to a position where you're able to be in control and start making strategic decisions on how you're going to be able to take control over your ability to generate customers. Now, of those 10 things that I went over, be honest with yourself. Which of those are you guilty of right now, right? Which of those that I mentioned jumped out at you that you're like, yeah, we do that. I got to stop doing that. Because here's the truth. Even fixing just 1 or 2 of those things could make a big difference between staying stuck in survival mode and finally stepping into stability. So here's your challenge. Grab a piece of paper, make sure that you write down the top 3 mistakes that hit you the hardest when I went through that list. Circle the one that you're going to address first, and then go from there. Knock out the other 2, guys. Do the work, put in the reps so that you can take control. And if you want help putting the right systems in place so that you can break free for good, check the link in the description and the show notes. We've got a free training that walks through the entire growth engine model. And when you're ready, we can walk you step by step through installing that in your business. You can also find us at drivenforgrowth.co, where you can book a call with us. If you're like, hey, all of that sounds great, I need to get this done yesterday, let's go. Reach out to us and we can see if we're a good fit to help you. And don't forget, guys, hit subscribe on YouTube or where you follow the podcast, because next week we're going to be diving into part 2 of this mini series about how to escape the owner overload loop. All right, guys, until then, stay driven for growth.